Hello, everybody. Welcome to Plant Party. Today, we're identifying plants without leaves or flowers. Plant Party is hosted by Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. Plant Party is a quarterly webinar intended for advanced plant training and fun education. I'm Megan Clayton, professor and extension range specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. My co-hosts are Tim Sigmund, the private lands program leader with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and Charles Kneiper, state resource conservationist with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. We have 15 wonderful door prizes we'll be giving away as a part of today's event. Our door prize donors are committed to supporting you in your quest to learn more about plants. I'd like to thank Bamert Seed, Native American Seed, Texas Quail Forever, Renewable Resources Extension Act, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service for donating these neat prizes. Our first presenter today is Dr. Mark Merriweather Voorderbruggen. I have trouble with that one. Merriweather is often somewhat jokingly described as a scientist raised by wolves. Having an MS in medicinal chemistry and a PhD in physical organic chemistry, he brings science into the world of wild, edible, and medicinal plants. On the science side, he has 16 patents and numerous articles in research journals from his career as a chemist. But his true love is plants and the miracles they contain. Since 2008, his website, www.foragingtexas.com, has been one of the top wild, edible, medicinal plant sites on the internet. He's written countless foraging articles for a wide variety of magazines, taught hundreds of foraging walkabouts, appeared on radio, TV, and podcasts galore, wrote the acclaimed book, Idiot's Guide to Foraging, I need that, an Outdoor Adventures Guide Foraging, and was co-creator of the Wazoo Survival Gear Foraging Bandana. In 2020, he made the biggest leap of his life to become the medicine man for Medicine Man Plant Company, where he can finally bring forth the ancient plants to help with modern issues. In addition to all of this, in 2024, he started the Texas Village Healer Initiative with the goal of training an herbalist healer for every town, village, and neighborhood. He'll be presenting on Winter's Bark. Thanks for kicking off our plant party, Dr. Merriweather.
Okay, let's just jump right in because I'm a food guy. I love plants. I will show you how to identify plants. But what I'm interested in this presentation is to help you eat some unusual foods from these plants, mainly the bark. So when it comes to identifying trees in the winter, my favorite resource is the book Winter Tree Finder. It's a little pamphlet, but what it is a key guide. So it walks you through the bark, the buds, the twigs, the leaves on the ground, things like that to help you identify what this plant may be or what this tree may be. In the case of the twigs that I know, we have a number of people talking about identification via the twigs, the barks of the dried leaves. So I'm not going to go into much detail, but this here is a pecan. And you're used to thinking the nuts are what you want off the pecans, but you can also do something really cool with the bark. You can make a syrup from it. So to do this, you want to start by collecting about a pound of clean, lichen-free pecan bark. The sheddy parts out here is what you're after. You want to roast it at 350 degrees for 20-25 minutes. Use your nose when it really has that just pecan smoky flavor. You're about at the right spot. Take it out of the oven, break it into little pieces, about 1-inch pieces, and boil it for 30 minutes. So you want to cover it completely with water, have just a little bit extra water on it, and start boiling for 30 minutes. You do have to strain out the bark and the dust and stuff, the sawdust from it. I like to filter it through the bandana that was mentioned earlier in the intro, but you want to get all the wood pieces out so all you have is this beautiful liquid. Once you have this liquid, measure it, because a lot of this is eyeball. You started with a pound of bark, you threw in enough water to cover it. How much water you put in it really depends on you. but whatever amount of liquid you have after straining out the bark, you add that much sugar to it. So this is a very sugary concoction, but basically for every cup of liquid, you're adding a cup of granulated sugar. That's what makes it good. That's what makes it terrible for you. But hey, we're in the holiday seasons. It's time to indulge yourself. Next step is you boil it down. And in this case, you want some sort of thermometer that can go a bit high. If you've ever made candy or syrup before, the addition of sugar to water increases the boiling point as the concentration of sugar increases. So you want to boil it to between 220 degrees Fahrenheit up to 225 degrees Fahrenheit. If you like a thicker syrup, go to the higher temperature. That will have a higher concentration of the sugar. If you want it a little more runny, go at least to 220 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it's done, you get something quite beautiful. So this was boiled to 220. The blurred background kind of screws it up some. But the end result is something that you can store in your fridge for 3 to 4 months. You do need to keep it in the fridge because it is high in sugar, which makes it really attractive to bacteria and so forth. If you accidentally contaminate it or one of your kids contaminates it, you can end up with stuff growing in it. And at that point, you want to throw it out. But keep it in the fridge, 3, 4 months, no problem. Now, this resulting syrup you can use in all sorts of ways. You can use it as a syrup on pancakes, which I'm going to show you next, how to make pancakes from pine bark. But you can also use it in cocktails. You can use it as a glaze. The turkey I made for Thanksgiving was rubbed with this to give a nice roasted pecan bark syrup glaze on it. The resulting flavor is almost like a smoked pecan honey. So it has a really nice flavor to it. I put it in my coffee. I put it in whipped cream and whip it up into a sugary kind of smoked pecan whipped cream sort of thing. If you know how to make hard candy where you boil it down even more, you can actually make roasted pecan bark candy from it. But the syrup is, I find, to be the most useful across all sorts of recipes. And that's what I'm into. I love knowledge, but I love knowledge that allows me to eat something more than just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So I mentioned pancakes. Now, I admit finding a pine tree in the winter is kind of easy if they're around. They still have the needles on them. But in this case, to make pine flour pancakes, you need the cambium layer, the living layer. Now, before anyone gets freaked out by this picture, let me just tell you, this is at a piece of property my friend owned who is going to clear the property to start building a house there. So all these trees you see in the picture were going to be cut down in the next few weeks, and he graciously allowed me to go out and harvest a bunch of cambium layer. To do this, you have to do what's called window painting the tree, where you reach up, you make a horizontal cut, 2 side cuts, and down, you cut a big rectangle out, pry it away. The cambium layer peels very easily from the outer bark layer. The cambium layer is the living layer of the wood. And in the pine, this has actually been a staple food of humanity for millennia because the cambium layer, this inner living bark of the pine trees, has between 400 and 600 calories per pound of freshly harvested pine bark, mostly in the form of starch. Starch ground up, we got flour. So we want to separate the cambium layer, peel it off in strips. I say aim for the thickness of the strips to be around that of a Pringles potato chip. You don't want it very thick, but it's very easy to peel it that thinly. If you got strong fingernails or a sharp knife, you can make a little cut at the top and it peels like string cheese. Once you have these strips, you go back to the roasting step. Again, 320 degrees Fahrenheit, 20, 25 minutes. You don't want them charred, but you want them very brittle and just, deep, deep brown in color. Once you're there, and actually, let's see if this will work. It might be a little loud. but you want to grind these roasted things up in a blender or a food processor or something like that, because you want to grind it down into a flour. The finer you can get it, the better the flour will be. So hopefully you have a blender or something you can use. If you really want to get into it, after you've ground it to about the size of cornmeal, you can then run it through a grain mill to grind it into a really fine flour. At that point, whatever your favorite pancake recipe is, usually you replace about 1/4 of the flour with the pine flour. You can go up to half. Beyond half, because the pine flour does not have the gluten in it, the pancakes can end up kind of falling apart some. So I like to have at least half flour. My family kind of prefers 3/4 of the flour in there. But other than that, just use your regular pancake recipe that your grandma handed down to you, or your grandpa, or whoever. But you replace 1/4 of the flour to half of the flour with the ground up roasted inner bark of the pine tree. So those of you who don't cook pancakes regularly, the trick is wait until you see the bubbles forming on the surface. At that point, flip it over, cook it a bit more, and always also remember the first pancake is the sacrificial pancake. No one ever gets the first pancake right. So don't worry about the first one, but the second one, you'll have it down. Flip it over, cook it a bit more, throw some butter on it, throw your pecan bark syrup over it, and you are good to go. Now I have a few minutes yet, I believe, so let me just say a few things here. Not only does pecan bark work for making syrup, but so do another of other trees. If you use it to smoke meat, say mesquite, apple, oak, any of those, you can take the bark from those trees, roast it, and make a syrup out of it. I will tell you, the mesquite bark is amazing. It has that nice smoky mesquite flavor to the syrup. So once you see everyone's presentation today here, you'll know how to identify a lot of different trees in the wild. And if it's something that is used to smoke meat, it is something that you can use to make the syrup from. As far as the flour, pine, elm, maples, the inner bark, the cambium layer of those will also work, same process as using the pine. I just happen to have access to a lot of pine when I was getting ready for this talk. So there you have it. It's actually very simple to do. It takes a little time. You got to go out in the wild, but that's a good thing. All right. I think I've pretty much used up my time. So I am turning it back to our host, and away we go with the next talk.
Thanks for that great presentation, Dr. Vorderbruggen. We're going to roll right into our second presentation. Next up will be Beth McMahon, a horticultural agent for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, otherwise known as a plant wizard. Beth graduated from Texas A&M University in December 2010 with a double major in rangeland ecology and management and horticulture. She interned at the Grand Canyon National Park from February of 2011 to July of 2011 as one of their native plant nursery interns. Following this, she was accepted into Oklahoma State University, where she got her Master of Science working on propagation efforts of the Chickasaw plum. She joined AgriLife Extension first by working as a research assistant at the AgriLife Extension Viticulture and Fruit Lab before transferring to the Brazoria County Horticultural Extension Agent position in January of 2015. She moved to the Gillespie County Horticulture Extension Agent position in late July of 2016 and works there currently, leading home and commercial horticulture programs as well as coaching the local 4-H range and plant ID team. In her spare time, she enjoys cooking and gardening. Today, Beth will be speaking on identification tips for grasses missing seed heads. I'll turn it over to you, Beth.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. So my name is Beth McMahon. I'm with the Gillespie County Horticulture Extension Office. And first I'm going to cover some helpful things. So advanced knowledge for the grasses that you're trying to identify is pretty important. So if you have a grass, you have never seen it before in your life, even if it had a seed head, it's usually easier to start with seed heads before you to get to that point. So you do need to know a little bit about the grasses that you're trying to identify if you don't have a seed head, to identify them without a seed head. And I'll explain what that means later on in the presentation. Also, when we identify grasses without seed heads, you need to use more than one thing to identify them. So use more of like a sum of all parts rather than, oh my gosh, it's got a prominent midrib. It must be Johnson grass. No, there's other things that have that. Some important tools, magnifying glasses. Some of these plant parts that I'm going to list today are very small. Those are helpful. A grass ID book is always good. Some good resources real quickly. University of Texas, I don't discriminate, even though I'm an Aggie, does have an excellent grass pictures at that website down there below. And then iNaturalist is usually pretty good too. So consider this situation. You have a grass, no seed heads, and you have no idea what its name is. You weren't in my range judging team long enough to remember what it could be, and your plant app isn't currently working at that time. What are you going to do? Well, honestly, you could take a picture of it and then try to upload it on your app later, or you can give it a shot trying to identify it without a seed head. This is a picture of a mystery grass that was outside my old office. If you want to go ahead and in the chat box, put a guess on what it is, I will cover it, what it actually is on the last slide. So the first thing I do when I'm trying to figure out what a grass is and there's no seed heads nearby is there's no seed heads. I try to look and see if there's more grasses nearby. So for example, take that grass that 3 on down there. I'm going to look and see if there's others that might actually have seed heads. Then you'll get lucky and you won't need to pay attention to the rest of the presentation. Another thing I look for is to see if there are more of the grass nearby. That kind of tells me if it forms a colony or not. Some grasses will spread and form colonies, and then some grasses kind of grow individually, even though there be more nearby. Another thing, leaf blades are very important for you to check. So that grass in the previous slide, this one right here is called Johnson grass. So Johnson grass has a structure that is called a rhizome. It is a underground modified stem, looks like a root, but we can't call it a root because of plant taxonomists. Anyway, so it travels underground and it pops up a little seedling here and it pops one up there. So that's one way that I can usually identify Johnson grass. Now, another way that I can identify Johnson grass without a seed head is this prominent midrib. So you see this line right there. You should be able to see it easily on your computer screen. It's just right there in your face. Both of these pictures are from Johnson grass. So Johnson grass has a prominent midrib. So if I see a grass that is growing in a colony, it has a prominent midrib, I'll be a little bit suspicious that it's Johnson grass, but I'll want one more identification characteristic before I'm going to really be certain that it is Johnson grass. Another thing that you can look for is the edge of the leaf blades. So some grasses, fall witch grass in my area. I live in the Texas Hill Country, by the way. It's got Fredericksburg, Harper, Kerrville, that kind of places. Fall witch grass is a common short grass here, and it has a crinkle on the edge of the leaf. There are not a lot of grasses in my region that have that crinkle, so when you see it and you see that it has short little leaves and it's usually a shorter plant, I can very reasonably identify it as fall witch grass without a seed head. Now there are other grasses that have this. There are some crabgrasses, but generally we don't have as much crabgrass as we have fall witch grass here. Some grasses have a cutting margin so that when you pull them, you accidentally get like paper cuts or other cuts and such. This can occur with some grasses, can occur with some others. The grass that is pictured right here is yellow Indian grass, but to be honest, that's not the main identification characteristic I use for that one in particular. Other things to look for leaves, you may have heard of the grass switchgrass. Switchgrass is a very tall grass, but one good identification characteristic is this crimp on the leaf. Now, honestly, sometimes this is hard to find, but right now, maybe because the leaves are starting to die back a little bit, it is super easy to see. So it has basically this area where it looks like it got pinched. And pretty much, I mean, there are other grasses that have that, but switchgrass is the biggest grass that I know that has it, and it has a big broad leaf. It comes singular out of the ground. So when I see this, I'm reasonably confident that it's switchgrass without seeing a seed head. Some grasses don't have leaf margins or leaf midribs at all. This is an example of inland sea oats. Around here, doesn't really have that much of a midrib. Some grasses have a disappearing midrib. So this grass right here is called Eastern Gama grass. This grass tends to grow near water where I'm at, though not always. And it has a very prominent midrib until it just suddenly disappears. It has very long leaves as well. So leaf thickness is sometimes helpful. I mean, if the pasture got grazed, then it's like, great. Well, you can still identify grasses if a pasture is grazed. It's just a lot easier if you find a plant that's not as grazed. So Eastern Gama grass typically has long leaves. Other grasses, say silver bluestem right over here, that is a fairly tall grass. This is an awkward picture right here, but you can see that it is about hip high with the seed head. But if you look at the stems, those leaves just aren't really that long for the height of the grass. So that is one kind of clue that I would use to identify that one, though with that one I would use additional ones. There are also grasses that have thin leaf blades. I live in a drier area, so my 3-awns typically don't have very nice, big, thick leaves. Honestly, I don't think any 3-awns have big, thick leaves, but I'm sure there's that one example out there and you can post it in the chat. So that can kind of help me identify it, at least to 3-awn. Size is sometimes helpful, sometimes not. So I've already mentioned fall witchgrass and how its short stature kind of helps me identify it, but the size thing can kind of catch you up. So my example here is going to be big bluestem. So this picture right here, as I said before, I live in an area that doesn't get a lot of rainfall and we have shallow soils. So whenever you see big bluestem, or whenever I do, I get so excited and I know that we actually had good summer rains. It's a great indicator of that. I mean, not that I didn't experience the rains, but I just get so excited when I see it because it is a really rare grass here. Now, the big bluestem that we have around here, it can get about shoulder high, hip high. I have seen it taller than me once. That's a secret spot. I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it typically does not get as tall as this. This picture right here was taken in Oklahoma. When I was in graduate school, I was very impressed with the height of that grass. I mean, that is some pretty darn high big bluestem. But in Oklahoma, they get more rain than we do, and the soils are deeper, so that grass can just really take off. Now, this picture down below here, this is at our local nature center, and I'm pretty certain somebody planted this grass here because that is not where big bluestem normally would be found. The soil here is very compacted. It is very tight. It's not caliche, but it's kind of the next best thing. It's that bad. And so this big bluestem is only about a little bit taller than my knee. So this is the same plant, but the heights are widely different. So height is going to be dependent upon soil depth, compaction, type, water, and then if some random person just came by and fertilized it, they exist. So keep that in mind when you're identifying grasses, that height can be very helpful, but it should not be the only thing that you use. And just sometimes grasses grow bigger than expected and sometimes smaller. Now, here's our friend, Eastern Gama grass again, and this too was taken at the Fredericksburg Nature Center over at Lady Bird Park. Eastern Gama grass tends to grow more wide rather than up. And this is a good example of it. I mean, it's kind of spreading out with those really long leaf blades and such. But there are smaller examples. So this picture I found off iNaturalist. I'm reasonably certain that this is Eastern Gama grass. Sometimes with iNaturalist there are issues. But this one is a smaller one. It's definitely not as big as that one. So kind of keep in mind that sometimes these grasses may just be small rather than their more mature size. Growth form. You have some grasses that appear as bunch grasses very consistently. A bunch grass is basically like a rounded mound with leaves coming out. And then you have sod forming grasses, which are just kind of like a tangled carpet, like the Bermuda grass right here. Very rarely are grasses both. One example would be Cytodes grama. It's got a bunch grass form, and then it's got a sod colony form. Typically, the sod grasses are going to have something called a runner or a stolon. This is an above ground traveling stem. If it was below ground, it would be a rhizome. Now, this is actually a pretty good identification characteristic. You're not going to see this on a lot of grasses. So knowing the ones that do have above ground runners and below ground runners, it can kind of help you separate out a lot of grasses that way. Hairs. This is where you would need a magnifying glass potentially. So how big the hairs are, what they feel like, if they're kind of feel like sandpaper, that would be more Texas wintergrass. I can tell Texas wintergrass just by touch. This one right here is brome. So there's a lot of brome species and they all feel, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, all feel very soft. And it's because they just have a whole lot of hair in them. Right here, this is Cytodes again, and Cytodes has a very good identification feature in that it has a glandular dot, and then it's got a hair sticking out of it. Now, when I teach kids this plant, I call it a pimple and a hair because that's easier for them to remember. Sounds a little gross. If you want to do glandular dot, you can do that instead. Typically, and it may not always have this though. So the fresh growth is more likely to have this, the dry dead growth is not. Kleingrass, Kleingrass and hairy grama can have this feature too, but typically Kleingrass is going to be a bigger plant. Color. Color is really not the best characteristic to use. So as a horticulturist, we have plants that we consider have fall color. This is Eastern Gamagrass again, and I would have never considered Eastern Gamagrass to have fall color. It is in the tribe Andropoconi, which includes big bluestem and little bluestem, which have excellent fall color, but not really something that I would have considered. So I would have never expected this grass to be that pretty. Now, something that may be helpful, and this is pretty much for my region, if you have festucas and poas, this may not be the, not poas, but with some grasses, this may not always be the case. But typically in my region, if you see something that is grass-like and it's got a dark base, it's typically a type of sedge, which is technically not a grass. So that's one color that I can kind of rely upon in my area. Now, if it's got a color in the name, it does not mean that it actually is going to be that color. This confuses my range stitching kids all the time. So for example, little bluestem. Do these stems look blue to you? No, they're red or purple. That does not look, I guess that right there could be blue, but I wouldn't name a grass bluestem based off of that. Maybe it actually is blue in other spots. Who knows? Blue grama. The grass down here, is that blue? No. Looking at the seed head, is that blue? No, it's red. Red grama, I guess, was already named by that point. The only blue grama that I've seen that has actually been blue was when I spray painted it. So yeah, I don't know why it's called that. Don't use color in the name as an indicator. Ligules and auricles. So we're going to learn some plant taxonomy. A plant collar, also known as auricle, is basically this part if you're wearing a coat, and then the ligule would be the tag on a coat. So ligules come in different forms. There is the ciliate ligule, there's no ligule at all, and then there's bunny ears. So bunny ears would be a split ligule right there. It kind of looks like that. That's very easy, very good characteristic to help you identify yellow India grass. The wraparound collar is kind of unusual. Typically our wild rice will have that. You'll basically have, it'll just be like wrapping around trying to choke the plant. Roots are typically going to be fibrous for grasses. You may have rhizomes, technically a modified stem. If you have a bulb, you may want to check and make sure that's actually a grass. Only one grass I know actually has a bulb. It's Melica bulbosa, and that one doesn't grow here. Nut sedges do have corms, but they're technically not a grass. Base of the plant, this is pretty helpful. So red grama, it does exist, is a bunch grass, but typically the inside of the plant tends to die out and it develops a bald spot. So that kind of might help you identify it, but use other characteristics. And then purple top, which is a very pretty grass with a seed head, it has these flat bases that mirror each other. So there's a flat base here, and then there's a flat base there, or at least they're supposed to. With that one characteristic and kind of looking and seeing how much foliage the plant has, I can usually easily identify purple top without a seed head very easily. Eastern gamagrass has that too, though, so consider where you're at. Mowing intensity, some grasses just don't exist in areas that have a lot of grazing or a lot of mowing. This is King Ranch bluestem right here. It is mowed down to the ground, but King Ranch bluestem does have the opportunity to grow full foliage. So just because it looks different doesn't mean it's a different grass. So to conclude, looking at these different grasses, it's helpful if you have some background knowledge about the grasses before you identify them. Keep in mind your area. Some grasses don't grow in all areas and such. For example, I don't really expect to see black grama in East Texas. That'd be weird. And with that, I will announce what the grass this one is right here. This is Eastern gamagrass. And I guess the former extension agent planted it in our landscape. I don't know how it got there, but it actually looks quite nice in a landscape. So I had to dig down to the base of the plant to see the flat base.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was great.
All right, next up, we have Dr. Jeremy Stovall to speak on winter tree identification. Dr. Stovall is the Bonehill Foundation Distinguished Professor of Silviculture at Stephen F. Austin State University, Axum Jex. He teaches dendrology and a variety of courses focused on silviculture and is actively involved in research focused on invasive species management, mineland reclamation, and bottom hardwood regeneration dynamics. Dr. Stovall advises the Sylvans, which is SFA's forestry club and timber sports team that has won 10 of the past 11 annual Southern Forestry Conclaves. Dr. Stovall, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Tim. So here at Stephen F. Austin State University, we're, as you may know, well behind the pine curtain. And so Nacogdoches is right in the middle of the Piney Woods ecoregion. So that's the perspective I'll be focusing on today with winter ID of primarily forest trees, shrubs, and other woody species. So option one for winter ID, use the leaves. Kind of counterintuitive in a session on IDing without leaves, but we have many species that are evergreen, like our pines, southern magnolia, many of the hollies. And so you have leaves year round, so that's helpful to ID those trees. I have a photo of a hickory here on the right, and they tend to drop their leaves later than most things, so you may still have leaves on them even in the early winter. We have many trees like this beech you see right here in the middle that are what we call marchescent, which just means they're deciduous species. They're just not very good at it. So most of the oaks fall into this category where they'll drop maybe 90% of their leaves, but they still have some where the abscission zone was poorly formed and the leaves don't tend to fall off the tree, especially lower in the crown where it's subject to less wind. Another good place to look for leaves is just look on the ground. And so some of our species do have leaves that decompose very rapidly, like black gum and some of the maples. But some of our species have leaves where they just don't have enough nitrogen in them when they drop them for bacteria and microbes and everything to break them down quickly. So those leaves stick around for a long time. So oaks are another good example of that. You can almost always, on a site that's not flooded at least, find oak leaves on the ground that can help you ID a tree. That's more helpful for big trees because big trees have a lot of leaves. If you have a sapling or a seedling you're trying to identify, you may not be able to find its leaves. But I generally tell our students, look for leaves even in winter. There's a good chance you can find them. If you can't find leaves, often you can find fruits. Not always. Juvenile trees don't have fruits. With our conifers, you can find cones. Just this past week at a dendrology lab, I had the students looking through a pecan, and they were digging up underneath it like crazy, looking to confirm that it was a pecan that they thought it was. One student found that the pecans hadn't dropped. They were still up in the tree. And once they found that, they knew for sure that they were looking at a pecan tree. I'm not going to get into this in any great detail because I know Austin has a whole talk on this coming up later. So option three is going to be the twig. Twigs are helpful if you can get them. Sometimes trees of species that are intolerant of shade, they may be a tall tree and they self-prune pretty well if they're intolerant of shade. So you may not be able to reach a twig. If you look around on the ground, often you can find a branch that's died and fallen out of the tree. When I say twig, it's not just a stick, it's not just a branch. It's specifically the last year's growth. And if you want to identify a twig, the best thing to look for is the freshest twig you can find that's got the most access to sunlight. That twig will have leaves on it that are getting lots of good light. They're making lots of sugar through photosynthesis, and they just have better features. They've got more carbohydrates to allocate to pigments, fur, hair, any twig feature you want to look at. It's really the most recent year's growth too. So you can find branches that have died years ago and finally fallen out of the tree, and there's nothing helpful on there to ID it at all. You want something that's fresh. And there's lots of different twig features. To get into it more, we kind of have to shift back to leaves, and I'll show you why in a minute. One very helpful thing in tree ID is defining whether the tree is compound or simple in terms of its leaf complexity, and then whether it's opposite, alternate, or whorled in terms of its leaf arrangement. So here's a simple leaf, a white oak leaf right here. That blade of that leaf, that's the whole leaf. All these other photos are of compound leaves, where you see a palmately compound Virginia creeper vine right here, where all 5 of these are leaflets that makes up one leaf. Here on black walnut, all those leaflets make up one leaf. And so looking at that in a little more detail, here's an example of a pinnately compound leaf. These are all leaflets. We call this part right here where the leaflets connect the rachis, and then the petiole is the stalk that connects it to the twig. This is important to understand whether it's compound or simple, because if it's compound, you can see these leaflets are opposite each other. On the rachis, you might mistakenly think this is opposite, when in fact the whole leaves alternate across each other on the stem. A good example of this would be any of the hickories like pecan. And so here's alternate leaf arrangement where the leaves simply alternate off each other on the twig. Here's opposite leaf arrangement on this red maple. And then we really have very few species that are whorled, where there's more than 2 leaves connecting at each point, at each node. So this is going to be pretty important to grouping trees. I'll show you that in a minute. But how do you figure out leaf arrangement and complexity in winter? Okay, start with complexity. And what you want to do with leaf complexity is look up in the tree. First off, this compound leaf is a large leaf. So typically trees with compound leaves have stouter twigs. So look for stout twigs. That can be an indicator. Second, what tends to happen is these leaflets fall off the rachis. The rachis then looks like a little twig on a big twig, and it's curled. It's not a twig, but it kind of looks like it. And then that will often fall off the tree. So if you look under a big tree, you've got stout twigs, and it looks like there's piles of straw or hay or something like that on the ground when you get a lot of these rachises that fall off the tree. So that's a good thing to look for to tell it's compound. And what you do then, once you know it's compound or simple, you can look for opposite or alternate. Here's an example of some sumac twigs here on the left. And this feature right here is a leaf scar. That's where the leaf was attached to the shrub in this case, and it fell off. Above where leaves attach are buds, okay? And so if the leaves are alternate, the buds are alternate. Buds break and form new twigs. So if the leaves are alternate, the buds are alternate, the twigs are alternate. Twigs grow in girth over time, over years, and they become branches. So if the leaf arrangement is alternate, everything about that tree is alternate. Here I have a photo of an ash on the right. It's easier to tell if a large ash tree is opposite or alternate in the winter simply because the leaves are out of the way. So what I look for is a branching pattern like this right here, where you can clearly see that the twigs alter or opposite each other. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be everywhere. Twigs break, but you can see in repeated places there are instances where they stick out opposite each other. So I look for that. That's going to be helpful on twigs. And then this kind of sounds like gibberish. And the taxonomy changes over time. So depending on whether you're using the ADOX-AC for the viburnums or the Caprifoliaceae still, this can get a little messier, but you can come up with your own acronym. You just need some way to memorize the opposite trees. So maples, ashes, and other members of the Oleaceae family, dogwoods, members of the Caprifoliaceae are now the ADOX-AC, the Bignoniaceae, the Hippocastanaceae, those families are the trees that tend to have opposite leaves and therefore opposite branching pattern, and you can still spot that in winter. And so this is most of the trees I teach in my sophomore level dendrology course. These are the most common trees in the Piney Woods ecoregion of Texas. And you can see very few of them are opposite, about 20 out of 150 or so. And of those, we only have 6 really that are opposite and compound. So if you can recognize that, there's a 50-50 shot in this bottom left corner here, you have an ash. And that makes identification much easier. So opposite, alternate, compound, simple, look for that on twigs, look for that on branching pattern, look for those rachises under the tree. That'll help you identify those. And then you can look at other twig features if you get a twig. This yellow poplar on the left has just 2 bud scales, so we call it valvate. Many trees like this Texas azalea in the middle have overlapping shingle-like scales we call imbricate. And then on the right, this bitternut hickory and other pecan hickories are usually pretty easy to identify because they have no bud scales at all. You're seeing little leaf primordia curled up there. So those are what we call naked buds. In bitternut hickory's case, they're sulfur yellow, and so identification becomes quite easy. Sometimes you can confirm what you see by whittling into the middle of a twig. Here's a black walnut on the left with a chambered pith. You can see that chocolate-colored open chambers. So that's a good ID feature, but you're not doing that to every twig. You kind of have to have an inkling of what you're looking at. If you have thorns or spines, that can definitely make identification easy. You may not have even noticed those on purpose, right? Prickly species like our Devil's Walking Stick or Hercules Club, that can help ID. And so there's more twig features that we didn't have time to go into, but there's a lot more that you can learn about twigs than you may have ever thought you could. We heard about cool stuff that you can do with bark, but bark's also very helpful to identify the tree. And sometimes you have a very obvious bark feature. Of all the things we're looking at, and when you're first learning how to identify trees, bark is probably the most difficult thing to do. It's the thing you need to see the most trees to get a real handle on. You need to get that pattern recognition down. And there's big groups of trees that include oaks, elms, black gum, other species where a lot of their bark looks kind of similar, right? So those become more difficult to tell apart. If you hand a little kid a box of crayons and tell them go draw a tree, what color are they grabbing for the trunk, right? It's brown every time. Look at these photos of bark. There's very little true brown in there. So bark is probably more varied than we think. Some folks developed, I've got a screenshot of the book there. Some folks developed a sort of bark taxonomy out of the Northeast, and it applies very well to our trees here in the US South as well. So here are their categories. You can have smooth, unbroken bark. Bark changes as trees age and as trees grow larger. If you want to see how a tree's bark varies with size, go find a big tree of that species. Bark generally starts smoother and gets rougher and more textured as trees age and get larger. But if you have that big tree, find a branch as big around as your thumb, and that's what bark on a sapling will look like. Find a branch that's a foot across in diameter. That's what a 1 foot diameter tree would look like. And then look at the base of that tree where it's 3 feet in diameter. That's what a really big tree is going to look like. If you have saplings you're trying to identify with bark features, I always tell students look all the way at the base. That's simply where it's largest. So if you think it's a sugarberry and you're looking for warts on a sapling, it's most likely to have them at the base. So look for that. Some trees retain smooth bark even when they get very large, like this American beech. That can be helpful. Some trees like this Chinese tallow have distinct lineacles. Here they're distinct because they're orange in color. That can help you ID. We have very few species where the bark peels horizontally. Usually it peels vertically. So if it peels horizontally, there's a river birch. That makes identification pretty easy. Sometimes you have vertical cracks or seams. This kind of fits in with smooth, unbroken bark pretty fluidly. So here's a willow oak as an example. Not always the easiest thing to help you ID. Those are going to be trickier species. Here's the black cherry with scaly bark. You can ID a dead black cherry pretty easily if you still have decent bark on it. Scale is small. Think about a cornflake. Think about the size of your thumbprint. That's what a scale is. You can have platy bark. So think about a dinner plate. Think about the palm of your hand, something like that. These are 4, 5, 6 inches, or maybe a little larger. That's an American sycamore with distinct platy bark that looks kind of camo colored. So that's a good ID. Bark that peels in vertical strips. So in Texas, we have eastern red cedar here in the piney woods. Lots of other junipers in other parts of the state that people, like to ID and, maybe aren't a big fan of, but those are known for that vertically peely bark. Here we have an eastern hop hornbeam with the same vertically peely bark. Then we have a lot of trees with ridges and furrows, and you can break those up into 3 subcategories. Here's your fancy $10 word, anastomosing. That just means these ridges break apart. So this one splits in half and then it comes back together. So it sort of forms this diamond grid pattern, kind of roughly. This is a chitomwood. It also goes by gumbumelia, and they're really thin ridges. That helps ID on that. The hickories and the ashes are known for this as well. Horizontally broken, like you see on this persimmon, or unbroken, like on this sassafras. And so that's a little bit on bark ID. This wasn't in that Northeast guide, but we have trees with warts like sugarberry, prickles like Hercules Club, and there's a water locust with aggressive branching thorns. And so that's a quick review of Winter Tree ID. Thanks to everyone for setting this up and attending. This is an awesome opportunity. I posted these slides on our SFA Dendro website. So if you go to that link right there, you can download all these slides.
That was a great presentation, Dr. Stovall. We really appreciate you being on. Next up, we're moving on to tiny plants. Michaela Pearson is a wildlife biologist with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department for McMullen County. Michaela earned her Bachelor's of Science degree from Texas A&M Kingsville in the spring of 2021. During her time as an undergraduate student, she worked for the East Foundation as a range ecology intern during the spring and summer, and a quail ecology intern or quail ecology technician during the fall and winter. Michaela returned to Tamuk in January of 2022 to study grassland restoration. Recently, in August 2025, she earned her Master's of Science degree with her thesis entitled The Evolution of Grassland Restoration Techniques and Seed Mix Development for Use on New Solar Developments in South Texas. That's a mouthful. She's been with Texas Parks and Wildlife for just over a year now. Welcome to the party, Michaela. I'll turn it over to you. You can tell us about how to identify small plants such as forbs and brush.
Thanks, Megan. So, yep, I work for Texas Parks and Wildlife down in McMullen County, so southern Texas. Most of my presentation will kind of be tailored towards those South Texas ecosystems and some of the things that we commonly see down here. Whenever I look at a forb and I start kind of identifying a plant, there are about 4 questions I ask myself. What herbaceous class is that plant in? So is it a forb? Is it a woody, or is it a grass? What's the leaf shape on it? That kind of encompasses everything that Dr. Stovall touched on in the last presentation. Is it a compound leaf? How does that leaf actually work? And is it palmated? Just the overall function and shape of that leaf. The growth pattern of those plants, is it growing upright? Does it have a prostrate growing pattern to where it covers the ground? And everything kind of within there. Or is it a combination of both? Is it prostrate and it has a large stalk coming up? Then finally, is there some type of flower on that plant? So kind of, am I looking at a forb or am I looking at a woody? When we're talking about small plants, that can be pretty hard to differentiate between. For example, we'll talk about it here in a minute, but mesquite, it actually starts out looking almost like a clover, and it can be real easy to misidentify in those early growth stages. So overall, forbs are broadleaf herbaceous plants, and they usually have soft stems. Some can have some lignin in them that make them a little more rigid. They have net-like veins in the leaves. They have both simple and compound leaves, but they typically have a showy flower and very fibrous roots. When we compared that to a woody or browse species, a woody or browse species is going to have those bark and cambium layers, as discussed in the previous presentation. They can also have net-like veins. They won't be linear like they are in grass. Both have simple and compound leaves. Some can have showy flowers, but it's not super common. We're usually seeing drupes or other types of fruit in place of those flowers. And most of our woody species will have some type of taproot that goes deep into the soil. So we'll jump into some family characteristics. I'm going to be covering 4 main families for the region. It can be pretty hard to cover all. It is very hard to cover all the forbs in South Texas or across the state in 15 minutes. But whenever I identify a plant, if you can get it into the family, you can then go to a plant book or different keys and really learn more about that plant and be able to easily identify it once you're within that family. So we're going to start out with the Asteraceae family. The Asteraceae family is the largest flowering family group of flowering plants. It has a composite type inflorescence. So let's think about a sunflower in that instance. You can see here a sunflower or an Indian blanket. Those have both ray and disc flowers present. So the ray flower is these showy petals around the outside, and then the disc flower is there in the middle. Asteraceae has both annual and perennial plants. We're most often seeing the annuals, and they tend to be yellow, orange kind of family color-wise, but there can even be purples and other different, more vibrant colors present. And they can be everything from an herbaceous forb to a shrub or subshrub. A few common examples are, like I was like I mentioned, a sunflower, an Indian blanket, orange Mania is going to be one of our shrubbier species for it. And then also prairie coneflower. So if we look, I wish I could zoom in for y'all on this prairie coneflower. Each one of these is going to be a leaf, so it's a compound leaf, like Dr. Stovall pointed out earlier. And we have these individual leaves or leafettes coming off of that rachis. And that stem is actually square. So if you were to pop one of those stems off and roll it in between your fingers, you'll feel the edges on it. And that's one of our few species that have square stems in South Texas. Other kind of characteristics and ways that you can tell it's an Asteraceae when, say, we don't have flowers, it's the end of fall, and we're trying to identify what's out there. In this picture, the sunflower and the Indian blanket, you see these little puff balls. That's actually what the seed head will look like when those ray and disc flowers completely come off of the structure of the flower. Another common family that we have down here is the Euphorbiaceae family. That's the family full of crotons. So they're herbaceous and can have some succulent stems, but this one can also is prone to having more lignin in it. If you ever pull a croton out of the ground and you kind of try to break it, when it's green, it won't break too hard because it's a little woody on the inside. And there is latex present, so that's more common in the species within this family called leather stem. So if you cut that at the base, there would be a milky sap that kind of comes out. And you can even use it for like some medicinal purposes if you're having like aches and pains and things like that. Overall for the family, they can be annual and perennial. There can be some trees within this family, but they're not super common down here. The most common tree in this family or browse species is the Chinese tallow, but it's mostly an herbaceous family. And there can be colors from coral, white, green, all types of colors in this family as well, but they tend to err towards this kind of light green color. And they can also be an herbaceous forb, shrub, vine, or some type of tree. Pictured here, I have a croton, and kind of a characteristic on both the croton and this cardinal feather that's photoed is they can both be very hairy. So if you didn't have any seed head and you're going out first thing in the morning to kind of look through and identify some plants, you'll notice that a lot of the Euphorbiaceae family will hold onto that moisture with all the fine ciliate hairs on the plant. So if you can go touch that plant and it'd just be really soft. It's one of the few very soft plants here in South Texas. Fabaceae family, probably one of the families people in South Texas are most familiar with, is a pea-like or puff flowers. The Fabaceae family is also called Legumiaceae, Legumiae, but it's a legume, so it's nitrogen fixing and has those beans that everyone's very familiar with. This family mostly has compound leaves, or it's mostly present with compound leaves. Longevity is annual and perennial, so we can have both types of plants. It's most common to see the perennial type plants, but I did throw an annual in here so y'all could see it. And again, it has a range of colors, but whenever we're looking, especially at the browse species, we really see these creamy colored flowers. So pictured here, in this top right corner is burr clover. That's one of the more forb type species that Fabaceae contains. And you notice it looks like a clover. It is a clover, and it's very, very indicative of other forb type species for this family. Other forbs in this family include showy partridge pea, sensitive briar, blue bonnet, anything that you see that kind of has that compound leaf that looks like a clover would be in this family. Earlier I mentioned mesquite kind of is a little funny. So this is actually what mesquite looks like whenever it first starts to bloom. It has what's called a cotyledon shaped leaf. So it looks like a little bow tie almost. And then those first leaves of the mesquite will sprout out from between that cotyledon leaf. Then finally, the Malvaceae family. This has all the mallows in it. So this one has primarily palmated lobed leaves. There's a ring of bracts or specialized leaves across at the bottom of each flower. I was trying to find one and point one out for y'all. You can see it here a little bit in these clusters. Mostly perennial plants are in here, but there are some annuals. Little fun fact, croton is actually in the Malvaceae family and is a mallow. So we can have all 4 shrubs and subshrubs in this family as well. Pictured is a Turk's cap, a apricot globe mallow, and a rock rose. The Turk's cap, you can very clearly see these palmate shaped or palmate veined leaves and those bracts. Hibiscus is also in this family, so that's why you might recognize this rock rose a little bit. And then this globe mallow is very common down here. It has a slightly different shaped leaf. It's more arrowhead shaped, but you can still see how that venation within those leaves palms out a little bit more. Thank y'all for having me chat today.
Thank you so much, Michaela. Those are excellent tips I'm sure we're all going to be using. All right, well, we're ready to get our last presentation started. Our final speaker is Austin Kelly. Austin is the founder and lead biologist of ARC Ecological Consulting. He specializes in botanical surveys and environmental wildlife consulting in Texas and across the U.S. He has taught botany courses at Texas A&M University for several years and served as the coach for the Texas A&M plant identification team. Austin is currently finishing his PhD in the Department of Ecology and Conservation Biology at Texas A&M University. I'll turn it over to you, Austin, to speak on botanical forensics, IDing plants by winter fruits and seeds. Super interesting.
All right, so I'm going to go into a little bit of botanical forensics. So we're going to be looking at IDing plants based on winter fruits and seeds. It was a little hard to pick what to talk about with all the other topics because every group of plants was covered in this talk. So we had the trees, we had grasses, and we had forbs. So I'm just going to do just a mash of all of them. So I'll get started. So the suspects have fled and the leaves are gone and the flowers have withered. And we will need to find out what were the plants that were here when during the growing season. And so why do we want to investigate what plants are out on our land? You're all here for a reason. At least one of these talks were interesting to you. And there's a lot of important reasons why we would need to identify different plants throughout the winter season. Including things like accurate stocking rates and wildlife habitat assessments. If you want to get a full assessment of how land is doing, you have to know what plants are there. If you want to read the land, you have to know the plants, and that means knowing them year-round. So you have to know what sort of keys we can look at to identify these plants even in the wintertime. So first off, we're going to kind of look at the crime scene and evaluate all our evidence. So these are just kind of some of the places you can start to look for these little clues that the plants have left behind. Of course, one is going to be the soil bank, and this would also include the litter that's on top of the soil. So there's lots of fallen fruits and nuts and legumes and things like that all over the ground on rangelands and forests across Texas. And so just start taking a look. Their main goal of these fruits is to be dispersed. So they're trying to get their fruit out as far as possible and get reproduced and get more babies. So another place you can look is on the skeleton of the plants. Sometimes not all the fruits fall off, or they will dehiss, which is another term for falling off. They can dehiss at different times throughout the winter season. So sometimes you'll still see some fruits on the stem even into the next growing season. And then another place to look, which is a little interesting, is to look in scat. So you can look in a lot of different kind of wildlife scat. You can look in coyote, foxes, and this is actually a way wildlife biologists will determine what their diet is. In fact, did you know that coyotes during the growing season of cactus, one of their top food sources is prickly pear cactuses. And so they determined that by looking at their scat and determining what seeds they found in the poop. And another place to look is in game birds in particular. You can look in the crop, which is a part of their digestive system that actually holds the seeds before they are mechanically digested. And so there you can determine what seeds they've been eating because the seeds are still intact. They haven't been broken down yet. And oftentimes researchers that are studying quail or dove or ducks, things like that, will look in the crop to determine what sort of seeds they've been eating. So we also need to know some terminology. So there's a few different ways that these fruits can get spread across the landscape. And one of those ways is through dehissing and through like an explosion. So there's quite a few different plants that will do something like this. This little drawing is actually not very botanically accurate, but it does kind of give you the idea of what happens for some seeds. So things in the Malvaceae will do this. So things such as cotton and okra, those are in the Malvaceae family and kind of do an explosion once they get ripe enough, even if it's on a small scale. And then there's things like poppy, which is the one that's in the picture here. And those will disperse lots of tiny seeds through little holes, and it will pop open, and all those seeds will spread as far as possible. Then there's indehiscent seeds, ones that don't really disperse away from where they were formed from the fruit itself. So the seed is contained within the whole fruit and they stay together most of the time. So something like an acorn and nuts, these are fruits that do not really split open. The seed stays intact. And then there's also dispersal methods like the travelers. And so one term that we use for this is zoochory, which is when animals will actually transport the seed for us. So the one in the top right in that picture is similar to like our buffalo burr or our xanthium. So there's just things like that will attach to the skin and get dispersed all across wherever the animal goes. So this is a very effective way of getting their seeds dispersed to new areas that they don't already live in. And then there's also things like wings. So that's an example of a maple leaf is on the top left. So you have some wings there, and then there's some other forms of seeds as well. And these are just ways to get their progeny out into the world. So now we're going to look at some of our fruit evidence. This was covered a little bit already, which is great. So just kind of a little refresher, we've got our legumes. So that's going to be the Fabaceae family. So that's the first picture, the one on the left. And those are the bean pods. So these are just some things that you can look at and then guess, oh, if it's got this characteristic, it's probably in this family. So if you have a legume, it's very likely going to be Fabaceae. There are things that look similar to legumes, like in the Bignoniaceae, which is like the trumpet creepers. Those are not legumes because they don't have individual seeds like a bean pod. They have lots of rows of seeds inside their bean pod or their seed pods, so to speak. Another example is the husked nut. This would be the Juglandaceae family. You probably know it as its common name, the pecan family or hickory and walnuts. So that's all in one family, and those are very unique to that family, having a husked nut, which is its seed. And then we've got an achene, which is typical for the Poaceae family and also the Cyperaceae family, which is the sedges and grasses. So that would be an achene, which is like a hard shell where the fruit is actually the seed and the fruit are fused together, and it's just a hard little seed. And then there's some structural evidence that isn't really related to the seeds themselves, but these are some helpful characteristics that we can use in the winter in particular. So take a look at these three images here and see if you can determine what are these three families. So the first one, we've got a pincushion head, which is actually a receptacle, which is the leftover part after the seeds have fallen off from an Asteraceae or the sunflower family. Then we have a square stem in the middle here, and that's going to be the Lamiaceae or Verbanaceae family. That's the mints and the verbenas. So things like lantana are in the verbena family. And then Lamiaceae has all our mints, of course. And then the third one here is kind of a unique thing. It looks like a ligule, but it's actually a ochrea is what this is called. Another term for this is ladyfingers, but this is relevant to our rumex, which is like our curly dock, and the smartweeds that are aquatic species. So this is where there's branching. There's like a little sheath around where the branching happens, and that's pretty unique to this family. So now I'm just going to give you a few examples of just some things to look out for specific species or genera. So in this case, we've got the toxic tomato imposter. So this is the Solanaceae family or Solanum. There's lots of different species in this family. Some are very toxic and some are not as toxic. But if you aren't sure, you should not try to eat them. They do look like little tomatoes, and that's because tomato is in this family or in this genus, the Solanum. And you can look for the spiky stems. So it's got thorns all over the stem. And these fruits are small berries. So tomatoes are actually berries. So they are fruits. But these little berries will turn yellow or black depending on the species and will start to shrivel like raisins in the winter time. So this is just all winter pictures to look out for. And its range is throughout Texas and through the Southwest. Another example would be our tick mimic. So in the top, you can see these little seeds. These are from croton, which is in the Euphorbiaceae family. And I believe Michaela already talked about croton a little bit, but this is the doveweed or prairie tea, goatweed. There's a lot of common names for these, and there's a lot of different species. But generally, the seeds come in threes, and you can see in the bottom left picture that is actually where the flower used to be. That's the little flower opening, and the seeds would have fallen out of that. They always come in sets of three. And then another unique thing about this one is the leaves in the wintertime will shrivel up and look like a hard shell taco. And this is a very good species for quail and dove. They have very desirable seeds, and they're quite large as far as seeds go. Another thing to look out for as far as very recognizable fruits, this would be in central and eastern Texas. We have our two holly species. So this is just in time for the winter holiday. We've got our Ilex decidua and Ilex vomitoria, so possum haw and yaupon. The main difference here is they're in the same genus, but the main difference is that one is evergreen and one is deciduous. So that's one of the easiest things to look out for, but they also have very different leaves if you do happen to see them in the spring or summertime. The leaf shape is quite different as well, and the way they grow is a bit different, but in the wintertime, it makes it quite easy because if the leaves have fallen off, it's definitely possum haw. Another thing to look out for, this one was a guess of a grass that I decided on, and I am glad it didn't get covered in the grass talk. This is Elamis, or our winter spike. So most grasses have a panicle where the branching happens in the seed head, but a spike is a specific kind of seed head that does not branch at all. And so in this case, we've got just like a bottle cleaner seed head. And the one on the left is in the winter, and the one on the top right is in the summer. So you can see what it looks like with and without seeds. But this is a very valuable thing because it's a winter growing species. And that's helpful for livestock and wildlife that need forage throughout the winter. And then one more I'd like to look at is the Ambrosia xylostachya, or the western ragweed. So this one's got a very unique seed that looks like it's wearing a jagged crown of thorns on the top of it. So that's a very unique seed. It's a very desirable seed for northern bobwhite quail. It's one of their top things that they look for in the winter time. And so that's a very good way to tell what this species is because you'll just see a mass of crumpled up leaves, but if you look closely, you can find these very unique seeds, and that will be a telltale sign that you have Western ragweed. Next, we have another example in the Fabaceae family. This is our twisted clusters. So we've got two different species here. On the left, we have velvet bundleflower, and on the right, we have Illinois bundleflower. And both are legumes. They have bean pods, but they're unique in that they have pods that curl around each other. So that's just another very desirable wildlife species, and their seeds do remain viable throughout the winter. So it's a good thing to have on your rangelands. And then one last one I'd like to cover is the Ugnatia speciosa, which is a very unique one to Texas and Mexico, which is the Mexican buckeye. And this one has very hard cannonball-like seeds. And you can see it's got a very hard shell. It looks like a buckeye, but technically it's not very closely related to buckeye. But it does have very large, round, hard seeds, and they are desirable. It is a very desirable shrub for wildlife. However, it has been shown that some of these seeds can be toxic, so don't go try to eat them. They are very hard anyway, so it would be very hard to try to chew on them. But lastly, I'd just like to end on don't retire your hand lens just because it gets cold outside. There's always enough evidence. If you look hard enough, you will be able to identify everything that's out there. So I just highly recommend that you go do your own investigating and try to figure out what plants you can find on your property. And so that's case closed, and good luck on you going off to do your next IDs out in the winter.
Austin, thanks for that great presentation. That was really good. And thanks again to our door prize sponsors, Bamert Seed, Native American Seed, Quail Forever, the Renewable Resources Extension Act, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. We appreciate all of their support of the Plant Party. Thanks again to all of our speakers and to you for attending our 21st Plant Party webinar. Again, Plant Party is a quarterly advanced plant webinar training series brought to you by USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. We will be sending a link to a short survey by email, or you can type in the address you see there on the screen, or we'll pop up the QR code that you can simply hold your phone camera over and click on the link that pops up. As a thank you for filling out our incredibly short survey, your phone number from the survey will be entered into a randomized drawing for 3 additional Plant Party door prizes just by simply completing the survey. This is our final Plant Party for this year, but we'll be back next year with 4 new exciting topics. Stay tuned, and thanks again for attending.